How did the strategies used in the mobilization period ultimately reflect the differences between the North and the South? During the mobilization period, the war tactics used by the North and the South in enlistment, finance, and military tactics differed due to the contrasts in goals, ideologies, and leading figures of both.
Between 1860 and 1861, many states seceded. South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas were among them, as well as Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee.
These are the ideas on war length. New York Times said,
"The local commotion in the South would be put down in 30 days.
A North Carolinian said,
"Those Yankees will quit after the first battle. Just throw 3 or 4 shells among those blue-bellied Yankees, and they'll scatter like sheep."
Union Commander William T. Sherman said,
I think it is to be a long war, very long, much longer than any politician thinks.
The South now faced a huge contradiction between its ideology and the demands of the full-scale war. Before the Civil War, the South was a big defender of states' rights against national authority. Now, the Confederate government passed a strict draft law. This draft law required 3 years of service from men between 18 and 35 years of age.
The draft law in the South exempted plantation owners with over 20 slaves.
Even though this exemption was to protect the productivity of large plantations and not the privilege, it led some Southerners to conclude that the struggle had become a rich man's war but a poor man's fight. There is also an exception in the North's draft law. "Hey, I'll pay you to be my substitute in this war."
Okay.
The North's resources far surpassed the South in population, industry, agriculture, and transportation.
Though the South had fewer resources, their main problem was actually finances. Because the South refused taxation, inflation spiraled out of control. The Confederacy financed 60% of the actual $1.5 billion spent on the war. The Union, on the other hand, issued paper money called greenbacks that were not backed by gold or silver, but they balanced this with an income tax, which prevented inflation. The president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, was born in the same home state that Lincoln was, which was Kentucky. Jefferson Davis started out as a planter, and by the 1840s was married. And in 1857 he became a Senate. When he became president, he was very aloof and he hated opposition. And he had to build a confederacy from nothing and faced a difficulty of finding a loyal base of support.
The reason Lincoln wanted the border states, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, Missouri, was because those states would protect the borders of other states in the Union, and also those states were so near Washington, D.C., the capital of the Union. Another reason was because Kentucky, the home state of both Jefferson Davis and Lincoln, was a very symbolic place, and Lincoln was successful in getting the border states.
During the early war period, from 1861 to 1862, the North's offense strategy highlighted the course of the war for the first 2 years. In the West, the Federal Army's objectives were to hold Missouri, Kentucky, and Tennessee for the Union, as well as to control the Mississippi River and to detach the area west of the Appalachians from Confederacy. While in the East, the Union sought to capture Richmond. During this time, Lincoln's attention moved southward, and on July 1861, there was the first Battle of Bull Run, and it was the success of the Confederates. And they also came Thomas J. Jackson, who earned the name Stonewall due to his courage, because he successfully repulsed the Union assault. And in the end, this boosted the South's confidence.
Ulysses S. Grant combined a river and land campaign and captured Fort Henry and Fort Donelson by February 16th. This was an extremely good Union victory because it drove a wedge into Southern territory and really closed the Confederacy's quickest path to the west from Virginia and the Carolinas. Now, The Confederacy's only safe link is across Appalachians, which was now through Georgia. The Confederacy never really recovered from this strategic advantage in the West after the loss of these two forts.
On April 6, 1862, the Confederates had a surprise attack on the Union at Shiloh Church, and Grant sent his troops and pushed the Southerners to Corinth. And earlier of 1862, the fall of New Orleans was important because it opened the Mississippi River, which was a big water source for the Union. The fighting at Shiloh was very important because it caused the loss of numerous American soldiers, which brought up the U.S. Sanitary Commission's attempt to upgrade their hospitals and medical care to help care for the American soldiers. And it was also during this time that soldiers turned to religion due to the growing carnage. And it was also during this time that the soldiers suffered from boredom and the harsh conditions of camp life. Meanwhile, in the East, on June 25, 1862, there was a 7-day battle, and it was between McClellan and Lee. And this led to the death of 30,000 men dying, and it ended with McClellan retreating. Next, the Second Battle of Bull Run. This was between Lee and John Pope, and it ended with Lee's victory, and he proved his invincibility reputation. What was the effect of the Emancipation Proclamation?
The Emancipation Proclamation had a positive effect for the Union, as it strengthened political parties and diplomatic positions, increased the number of Union militia, and infuriated the Confederacy.
The Union's main naval strategy was to blockade the southern coast and capture its key seaports and river towns. This would prevent arms, clothing, and food from reaching the Confederacy and keep cotton and tobacco from leaving. Doing this would destroy their trade and prevent the Confederacy from raising money to purchase the supplies it needed for the war. The Confederates had no way of breaking through the Union Navy, so instead they went around it by using blockade runners and certain privateers used to attack Union merchant ships.
Britain, you should support the Confederate cause because, well, if the country's divided, it'll pose less of a threat to British economic and territorial ambitions, and plus, you like our cotton. You know you do.
No, Britain, you should support us, the Union, because we are fighting a war against slavery, and the Confederates are for slavery. You don't like slavery, so you should support us.
Well, we do like your cotton, but we could get it from Egypt. And yes, we are anti-slavery, but we don't like you anyway. So we're gonna stay neutral. And trade with you guys both. But based on how well you do on the battlefield, we might support you.
Antietam was the most important turning point of the war. A Union corporal had found 3 wrapped cigars on the ground, tossed out by a careless Confederate officer. Surprisingly so, this wrapping was a copy of Lee's orders for the Army's movement. Unfortunately, the Union side was still slow to move, but happened to meet the Confederacy Army, and both sides fought the bloodiest single day of fighting in American history. Although it ended in a stalemate, the battle was a strategic defeat for the Confederacy. It kept Lee from directly threatening Northern industry and financial institutions, and ensured that Britain and France would not grant recognition to the Confederacy or support them. The bloody stalemate at Antietam allowed Lincoln the victory he needed to announce the abolition of slavery. On September 22, 1862, Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all slaves in states disloyal to the Union. Southerners reacted to the proclamation with outrage. Some saw it as an invitation to race war, while others feared what freed slaves would do to white women and children while their men were fighting in the battle. Davis himself thought this was a positive sign, as the proclamation would boost the morale of Southerners to the war. Northerners in general approved of the proclamation, even though abolitionists were a minority, but the Northerners saw this as a way to quicken the end of the war. The Emancipation Proclamation also established the Union in a better political stance, as it linked the war to a war of freedom instead of one trying to keep the Union together.
As word of the Emancipation Proclamation got out, slaves started to escape and celebrate their freedom. However, Southern plantation owners stopped them. Contrabands who were black slaves who escaped or was transported across Union lines during the Confiscation Act of 1862, began to help other fellow slaves steal their freedom.
As early as 1862, 5,000 African Americans had enrolled in the Union Army. Many runaway slaves ran past Union lines in order to protect their freedom. After gaining their freedom, many enlisted into the Army to help free their fellow slaves and redeem themselves. Although they were free, black soldiers still had less pay and lower jobs than other white soldiers. Still, despite discrimination, black soldiers fought bravely and courageously. They are also praised by many, or some young whites, who also said that the Negroes fought like mad demons. The most popular battle was with the 54th Massachusetts Voluntary Infantry at Fort Wagner outside Charleston. At Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, the Confederates won. However, Lee lost Stonewall Jackson, one of his top generals. At Gettysburg, Confederate General Lee and Union General Meade fought their battle, although Meade was able to outmaneuver Lee, leading in a Union victory. At Vicksburg, it was an easy battle, with Vicksburg surrendering to Union General Ulysses S. Grant. Chattanooga was another Union victory, as the Confederate Army was forced to retreat into Georgia. The Trans-Mississippi West was essential to the Confederacy cause, as it provided supplies and strategic advantages. Native American loyalties were generally split evenly between the Union and Confederacy, and Native Americans fought evenly on both sides. Texas, however, was a very important spot. However, it was internally divided, as some supported the Union and others supported the Confederacy. Later on, however, with the Union control of the Mississippi, Texas lost its importance, as the stance of the Southwest was decided at the Battle of Glorieta Pass in New Mexico, which was won by the Union, firmly establishing Union power in the Southwest.
In conclusion, by late fall 1863, the Civil War was basically pretty much over in large portions of the former Confederacy. The Confederacy had also lost the war over slavery in many parts of the South. President Lincoln was successful in being able to combine and connect the war with the noble causes of freedom and democratic government. However, though Lee was unbeaten on Southern soil, this Confederate cause was starting to spiral down and grow desperate. The North thrived in the war and victory and had endless reserve of troops and supplies, while the South's economy and morality and will started to falter.